Hey everyone, Kelly Dean Allen here with you again. So then today, something a little bit different. I'm going to do a guitar cover, but first I'm going to talk about it for a little bit, just because I feel like it, and it's interesting. Everybody does covers, but no one ever chit-chats about it first, giving a little bit of history about the track and why I chose to cover it in the first place. That said, if you don't want to hear me talk about this track and just want to check out the cover, you can skip ahead to about the 4-minute mark of this video. So then, Anthrax and Only. Now, back in the 80s, when it came to metal, there was one voice that, to me, stood head and shoulders over a heck of a lot of others, and that voice belonged to Armored Saint lead vocalist John Bush. The guy had some seriously powerful metal pipes on him, so serious that Metallica tried their very best to recruit him as the lead vocalist for Metallica instead of James Hetfield. This, even after Metallica recorded their first album, Kill 'Em All. See, at the time, James Hetfield was still unsure and uncomfortable about his singing voice and thought that he might like to just concentrate on guitar going forward with Metallica. That's it. There was one and only one option to replace him. John Bush. Unfortunately, or fortunately perhaps, Bush declined the offer and decided to stay with his own band, Armored Saint, as they were starting to garner more and more attention themselves from record companies and fans alike. Metallica, it goes without saying, did just fine without him. However, it's an interesting bit of rock and roll history of what just might have been. Hetfield is Hetfield and the voice of Metallica, obviously. But I think it's fair to say that his vocal range has always been somewhat limited. Not so with John Bush. Damn, what I wouldn't give to hear the Ride the Lightning albums and Master of Puppets, with John Bush on vocals, just out of curiosity. That would be sick. Now, obviously, Armored Saint never even came close to approaching the popularity of Metallica as the 80s grew to a close. And by 1992, they weren't even together anymore. And that's when another offer came rolling in for the now unemployed John Bush, this time from another of the big four metal bands, Anthrax. And on this occasion, with no Armored Saint to keep him tied down, he jumped at the opportunity. And what Anthrax produced in 1993 with new vocalist John Bush at the helm is, in my opinion, their very best album, Sound of White Noise. In dialing back the thrash and dialing up the alt metal, grunge, groove metal aspect of their sound, because, it was extremely popular at the time, Anthrax produced the hugely underrated and vastly underappreciated album Sound of White Noise. Now, sadly and unfortunately for Anthrax, the album didn't quite click with fans on either side of the metal fence, despite the fact that it debuted at number 7 on the Billboard charts, their highest position ever. One has to conclude that their core thrash metal fans likely pushed it to that chart position initially, but felt somewhat let down upon actually hearing it, what with there being very little thrash metal on it, and God forbid, melodies, while the alt metal grunge crowd just didn't really get on board at all. That's it. After the initial minor success of the track we're covering today, Only, the album basically fell off the charts and has remained one of those 90s albums that should have hit big, but sadly didn't. The metalheads didn't get it, and the grunge crowd, like I said, all but ignored it. That's it. If you like grunge and alt metal from the 90s as much as I do, Soundgarden and Alice in Chains in particular, do yourself a favor and give a listen to Sound of White Noise by Anthrax. You'll sure to enjoy it. And that's it. Let's finally get on with our cover of Only, a track that James Hetfield himself called the perfect song. Now, apologies on the solo, as it's more of an approximation of the solo and not note for note, as I learned it in about 15 minutes. Still pretty decent, however, I think. Let's check it out.
the boy.